It's one of the laws that the Federalist Society is having a meeting at. Now, the Federalist Society, I'm going to tell you more about them in a minute, but they're a right-wing organization that was founded after Roe to put conservative justices into positions of power so that they can take away bodily autonomy from all of us. Every justice and all six of these fuckers who voted to get rid of Roe are members of the Federalist Society.
All right, everybody, we're going to get started in just a few minutes. We just wanted to show you guys a little bit about what we've been doing in DSA. If you want, you can go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. Just let us know your name and where you're from. Yeah, introduce yourselves. And we'll get started in just a minute, letting people file in.
Hey everyone, thank you so much again for joining this call. Welcome to the Protect Abortion training call. We're going to get started in just a minute since we have a really packed agenda. Right now we have over 240 people on the call, and I imagine we'll get some more as they come in from all over the country. My name is Renee Parody, she, her. I'm in East Bay DSA and a member of our Protect Abortion National Committee / Working Group that's putting on this training. I'm going to go ahead and ask that we move on to our first slide and have our panelists begin introducing themselves. So first, Caitlin, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Marone. My pronouns are she, her. I'm one of the staff field organizers here with DSA. I am located in Michigan, a state where our abortion rights are questioned right now. So yeah, really excited to be here tonight. Really excited to see so many of you here and ready to fight.
Thank you. Suze.
Hi, everyone. My name is Suze Rochelle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of Metro DC DSA, but currently based in Mexico City. I'm also a member of the Protect Abortion DSA committee, as well as a case manager with the DC Abortion Fund. And just, yeah, really thrilled to be here with you all tonight.
Great, thank you. And Justin.
Hello, everybody. My name is Justin Charles. I use he, him pronouns. I'm located in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm a member of DSA's National Political Committee.
All right, next slide, please. So we just wanted to ask everyone to, be comradely on tonight's call, respect the facilitators and the people facilitating the chat and discussion, share the air and encourage others, practice good faith. We are not gonna, we obviously will have the chat open, but not have a lot of Q&A. But if you are using the chat, please stay on relevant topics. Having entirely separate conversations is going to make it hard for us to, follow along and facilitate the chat. And feel free to use the DMs if you want to follow up with someone. If you have questions during the call that you want the panelists or the folks helping us out to answer, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We're going to be monitoring the chat, but it's not necessarily going to filter back up to the panelists. So let's go on to our next slide. So just to give you a very brief agenda, we're going to go over the goals of the call. We're going to give what we're calling a little bit of a 101 background on abortion itself, both medicine, how it's provided currently, what the legal landscape is, And then turn to building power. What kinds of campaigns can we do that will get to where we need to be? And this training is basically designed as a two-part training. This training is to give all the background that we hope you would need to go back to your chapters and start thinking about what kinds of campaigns and actions you can do to, in this fight to help build this up. And then we're going to come back on a second, training where we're going to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of designing campaigns. And so in my own chapter, what we're doing is we're having an organizing meeting after this training and before the next one, so we can have that discussion and then come back to our next training ready to really dig in. So this first call is going to be a lot of information sharing. The next call is going to be a lot more interactive and training oriented. And as I think we all know, this is going to be a long fight. It's going to be a decades long fight potentially. We all have the same feeling of urgency. People are literally dying right now from this decision. Their lives are being devastated by this decision, but the right won this through 50 years of fighting. And, we're going to do it faster, but it's still going to take a while. And so what we want to really do with the reason why we're doing sort of these two trainings is to really make sure that we're building the kinds of campaigns that can build the movement we need. And root it as much as possible in collaboration, between chapters and national, and with other folks in the struggle and in the movement. So we wanted to launch a Zoom poll now that's going to, and so if you go to the next slide, of just who's here tonight, just a really brief survey to gauge who's here. We have at this point over 280 folks. So if you can just go ahead and fill out the Zoom poll, that would be great. And while folks are filling that out, we'll go to the next slide, and I will bounce it over to Justin, who can get started when our poll is done. Thank you.
All right, hey everybody. Again, I'm Justin Charles, see him from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm a member of DSA's National Political Committee. But who are we and what is DSA? This training, of course, is being run by the Democratic Socialists of America, and the Democratic Socialists of America is a national political organization funded and run democratically by members that seeks to build a mass movement and transfer power from the ruling elite to the working class and gain freedom and democratic control over all aspects of our lives. Since our founding in 1982, DSA has always fought for reproductive freedom for the entire working class. Because the working class must have control over our own bodies, our labor, and our lives in order to be truly free. The far-right majority on the Supreme Court knows that abortion rights are about power, and that's why they want to take these rights away. At our last convention, we adopted a national platform, which includes these reproductive justice demands. We understand the fight for reproductive rights to be intimately tied to racial justice, migrant justice, and the fight for gender equality. It's a cornerstone of working class liberation. Many of these demands are encompassed by our demand for universal single-payer healthcare or Medicare for all, radically restructuring our healthcare system to take it out of the hands of profit-seeking capitalist class would break down financial barriers to reproductive freedom, while also separating our ability to access life-saving care from the interest of employers. If Medicare for all includes comprehensive reproductive care, it will be the strongest protection we have against those who wish to roll those rights back. Ending the relationship between employers and access to healthcare would be a massive shift in power from the capitalist class to the working class. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you, Justin. So the fight for Roe is the fight for everything. What do we mean by that? Next slide. Dobbs is, I think it looks like our poll has ended. So we'll go ahead and share the results. And we want to shout out the at least 3, last time I checked, abortion providers on this call. Thank you very much for your service and solidarity in this time of great turmoil. Why do we say the fight for Roe is the fight for everything? Dobbs is one among many decisions made by the Christian nationalist right-wing Supreme Court majority that takes away fundamental rights or will. The Supreme Court's fundamentally a minoritarian institution that is the bulwark of capitalists against any radical change. We've seen that in the EPA decision this year, in the Obamacare decision earlier, striking down forced Medicare expansion, and is actively part of the consolidation of right-wing minority rule from the rulings around money in politics like Citizens United and this term's Ted Cruz decision, the gerrymandering cases, basically saying that there's nothing that requires that states not intensely gerrymander their delegations to lock, striking down the Voting Rights Act or key provisions thereof. And most terrifyingly, they're taking up the independent state legislature doctrine decision next year, which would allow state legislatures to simply appoint slates of electors to elect the president, regardless of who won any election in the state. To win nationwide protection for abortion rights, for reproductive health care, for reproductive justice, we're going to have to force a confrontation with the power of the court, whether through the stripping parts of its jurisdiction, electing officials that will, commit to ignore its ruling, or that ends our, anti-democratic constitutional order. Precipitating and winning this kind of constitutional showdown is necessary not just to win the fight on abortion, but to save the bourgeois democracy we have and to create the conditions that would allow us to win a socialist order in the United States, which is to say, this is a moment where a lot of people are really angry about the fundamental anti-democratic nature of the American system, which is a great moment for us to talk about what it would take to win this fight and how that demonstrates all the other fights we need to win. So this is a fight for both tomorrow and far beyond. Next slide, please. So why this training? From the grassroots, from getting everybody organized. The terrain is going to be very different depending on where you live and what abortion access looks like in your state, legally, politically, what kinds of targets you have, all of that. Actions without analysis are much less likely to succeed, and you understand your local allies, opponents in history, or you will shortly. So this session, we hope, will help you, whether you're new to organizing or a chapter leader, learn the tools and techniques to research who would make a good target in your state, what kind of campaign you should do. We want to win. We just don't want to make a statement. So this is about how to build the collective democratic power and effectively fight back. Next slide, please. So these are sort of what we see as the 3 things that we're thinking about this national campaign involving, right? So there's a harm reduction or mutual aid component, which is there are, millions of people who now no longer live in a state where they can access safe abortion care. And there will be actions that connect to that provision. And that's an important piece, but it's not going to get us there. So the other two pieces are, one, winning the political fight for all to obtain care at the scale of the millions of people who need it, and ultimately ending the ruling class and Supreme Court's undemocratic power over this and all aspects of our lives. Next slide. So right now I'm going to hand it over to Suze, who's just going to go through some of the medical basics of abortion and the facts around abortion provision in the United States as it stood before our robed clerics took away our bodily autonomy.
Thanks, Renee. So like Renee said, we're going to take a few minutes just to recap what did abortion look like in the US before Roe was overturned, because we know that Roe has always been the floor, not the ceiling, and that it is a huge part of how we got to where we are today, is what's happened in the past 6 years since Roe was passed. Next slide. So quick overview, two main ways to have an abortion: medication abortions and then surgical or in-clinic abortions. We're not going to get into the weeds of the technical specifics of each procedure, but we think it's important to understand key differences between the two to understand the implications and consequences of different decisions moving forward. Before we start, a key factor in what abortion options are available to someone is the gestational age of a pregnancy, or how far along you are in your pregnancy. The important thing to know is that gestational age is based on the first date of your last menstrual period, not the date you conceived. So that means if your last menstrual period was a month ago and you found out you were pregnant today, you would already be considered 4 weeks pregnant, even if you only conceived 2 weeks ago. So that obviously has a huge impact on your available options. And it's a big reason why abortion activists accurately refer to 6-week abortion bans and things like that as effectively total abortion bans, if you only have 2 weeks from when you find out that you're pregnant to seek any care. So like I said, two main ways: a medication abortion, which traditionally involves 2 pills, mifepristone, which ends the pregnancy, and then misoprostol, which induces cramps and bleeding to empty the uterus. Clinics in the US typically only provide medication abortions up to 9 or 10 weeks of pregnancy because of FDA approvals and legal restrictions. But we know that it's safe and effective up to at least 12 weeks, and many activists have used it even later, but regimens, doses, efficacy, things like that can vary later in pregnancy. Medication abortion has become significantly more common in recent years in the US, even before the Roe decision. In 2020, for example, medication abortion accounted for about 54% of all abortions in the US, compared to 37% in 2017. And it's obviously way too early to know what that's going to look like in the future because of Roe, but I think we can anticipate that the popularity and the desirability of medication abortion is only going to continue to rise. The duration of a medication abortion can vary based on a variety of factors, but the whole process typically takes about 1 to 3 days. And depending on state restrictions, pills can either be provided at a clinic in person or via telemedicine delivered by mail. There's also a wide range of resources that help facilitate self-managed abortion without the involvement of a medical professional at all. The other, about half, 45% of abortions are surgical, or in-clinic abortions, which can be performed at any point during a pregnancy. The specific methods vary depending on gestational age, but the majority of surgical abortions are vacuum aspiration abortions that take just a few minutes. But we also know that surgical abortions later in pregnancy can take up to several days and cost thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. Overall, different people choose different types of abortions based on available resources, health factors, access to clinics, and more. But we know that all forms of abortion are extremely safe, much safer than pregnancy and childbirth. And it's going to be important to have a wide range of options as we continue into this post-Roe America. Next slide. So now we're going to provide a little context on who actually provides abortion. So the vast majority of abortions, over 95%, are provided by clinics. So not hospitals, not physicians' offices, independent clinics, either those affiliated with Planned Parenthood, which is obviously the largest network and most recognizable name, or independent providers that are not affiliated with Planned Parenthood. Independent providers, again, even though Planned Parenthood is that most recognizable name, actually provide about 58% of abortion care. So that can mean both in-clinic procedures as well as providing pills for medication abortion. Whereas Planned Parenthood provides about 37%, and a very, very small fraction are provided outside of clinics. And a big reason for this is historical reasons, reinforced by both political reasons, such as harassment, protests, threats, abortion stigma, as well as some medical and business reasons. Even before Roe, again, the number of clinics in the US has been declining for years for many of these reasons, as well as trap laws that require abortion providers and clinics to meet unnecessary and often impossible to meet standards. There have been a lot of efforts in recent years to reintegrate abortion into mainstream healthcare, but there's still huge amounts of stigma, logistical barriers, and there's just simply not enough providers in the country willing or able to do this work. Again, while Planned Parenthood is the most recognizable name, independent abortion clinics provide care to 3 out of every 5 patients who have an abortion in the US. And that's often because they're the only clinic left in a state, or because they're the only clinic that provides in-clinic procedures, and thus there's people later in their pregnancy after 10 weeks. Next slide. And so the standalone clinic situation, the fact that a very, very small amount of providers are providing the vast majority of abortion procedures in the country, has left abortion provision in a very vulnerable state even before Roe. So in states with anti-abortion majorities during the Roe era, there were many restrictions of abortion, including waiting periods, informed consent from either partners or spouses or parents, forced ultrasounds, notifications, and then again, more recently, those targeted restrictions on abortion providers that required doctors to have admitting privileges at local hospitals or qualify as ambulatory surgical centers, which is completely unnecessary based on the safety of the procedure. There's also a huge range of extra legal means of restricting abortion, including harassing, terrorizing, and sometimes even murdering abortion providers, clinic workers, and anyone who works with an abortion clinic, purchasing property or billboards or parking lots near clinic to try to influence patients and staff, and then protesting clinic by harassing people seeking abortions. All of these factors have severely impacted the availability of care across the country in both red, blue, and purple states long before the overturning of Roe. And that means that the system has already been, and especially now, completely overwhelmed by demand. There's just simply not enough clinics and not enough providers to provide care for the people who are seeking abortion. And that's only getting more serious now that many people are having to travel out of state, even more so than before, for their care. And that means longer waiting periods. Making pregnant people wait for abortions is horrible for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's terrible to be pregnant any longer than you don't want to be, but also it becomes more expensive, more medically complicated, though still totally safe, but more complicated. And you might have to travel further to access care depending on restrictions in your own state. So as you can imagine, scaling up for demand is even more difficult, and we've already seen that in the weeks post-Roe. So only gonna get more pressure on the system, and more important to think through ways to support the providers who are still providing care. I'm going to pass it back to Renee to talk a little bit about how, unfortunately, this bad situation can only get worse now in this post-Roe America.
Indeed. Thank you, Suze. And apologies for the choppy video earlier. I have now moved closer to my router, so hopefully that will solve the issue. So next slide, please. So we've all seen these maps. This is where abortion is currently banned. It's 10 states, and then another 3 states have abortion bans that are currently being blocked by the courts. But you know, the terrible thing about the courts is it can have any moment it can change. So this is a complete ban. Next slide. These are the 4 states where we expect a ban soon. There are states that have Republican trifectas and nothing that would hold them back from banning abortion. Next slide. And then these are states that have gestational limits. You know, as Suze explained, you know, most abortions take place in that first trimester with either surgical or medication abortion. The very small number of people who end up getting abortions later in pregnancy, and that number will increase with these new bans, because every time you have to travel, you have to wait to get the money and the travel arrangements together. It's limited to particular states. So these are gestational limits in effect, currently blocked or coming soon. And, you know, gestational limits are in many states you wouldn't expect, also through practical reasons. You know, in both New York and California, there aren't necessarily providers that will go past, you know, into much later in pregnancy. And so if you have fetal anomalies or other reasons why you're getting very late term abortions, you often have to travel from the bluest of states to places where it's available. Next slide. So what will the post-Roe world look like? So we know what the pre-Roe world looked like. We know what it was like in 1973. You had huge numbers of women suffering sepsis from back alley abortions. You had really, providers who weren't necessarily acting in women's best interest. You had it was a horror show. I've spoken with many doctors who have provided abortion their entire lives because when they were on the maternity wards in 1972, when they're training, they saw the misery that was involved, and it made them dedicate their lives to this. But it's not 1973. Medical technology is much better, and we have the medication abortion, and we have so many states where there will be stuff available. So we're not going back to 1973 in good ways, but there are a lot of bad ways that we're not in 1973 either. You have much increased capacity for surveillance of women and other people seeking abortions and their providers. You have the explosion in the carceral state. 1973, you're just beginning mass incarceration. You don't have the same level of law enforcement and incarceration. And you also have an anti-abortion movement that is literally ruthless, that has previously murdered people providing abortions, and that is going to be incredibly incentivized to come up with new and different ways to legally punish people, but also ways to be vigilantes, right? We have the Texas law, which allows people to sue those who obtain or provide abortions, and every member of the pro-life community has a cell phone and has ability to surveil. So those are all the things that we don't really know what it's going to look like because of. There are a couple of things we can surmise. We can definitely surmise that people are going to have to travel a lot further, which will create more barriers, compounding the logistics of accessing abortion. You have to book travel, you have to take time off work, you have to find childcare. I forget whether it's most or just a huge proportion, but I think it's most people who have abortions already have kids. And you're going to have to find an excuse, right? A reason why you're leaving the state if it becomes illegal to leave your state for that purpose. If you have family members or employers who are going to punish you, all of those things is going to be magnified by increasing the distance that you have to travel. One way you won't have to travel is if you can get a medication abortion and do self-managed abortion. As Susan discussed earlier, medication abortion in states where it's legal is a 2-pill process, mifepristone and misoprostol. There are already people smuggling pills into states where access is tough through the mails, usually. And it's also worth noting that misoprostol alone is often up to 95% effective, even up to about 10 or 12 weeks. And historically, in Latin America, when abortion was banned there, it was very common to find misoprostol for sale at flea markets or other sort of gray market areas. And I think everybody assumes you're going to see a big explosion in gray and black market provision of both pills, but particularly misoprostol. And it's worth noting that those are all going to be really legally complicated, right? So it's legal to it's a question of what it's legal to do in terms of prescription, in terms of provision, in terms of accessing it. The FDA has taken the position that that the states cannot ban the abortion pills, but they can make it illegal to perform an abortion. So all of this is going to be developing, is I guess what we want to convey. In states where abortion is still legal, the demand, as we've discussed, is going to increase and create a backlog of appointments. One of the things that I think is is interesting to note is Planned Parenthood has for 10 years been building basically an abortion megaplex in Southern Illinois that they're planning to run 12 hours a day. Whether or not they could have taken that money and effort and spent it on more grassroots political organizing, I think is an open question. But you're going to see more things like that, where you have these facilities in safe states that become abortion oases. And the money and focus of the far right is going to shift from fighting to overturn Roe to punishing as many people as possible, making it as difficult as possible to leave the states where it's illegal, and pushing for things like a national abortion ban or a national, like a federal constitutional right to life that starts at conception, right? There are ways that they can punish all of us that they're going to start trying to do. And I think we can also imagine that we're going to see very creative ideas about how red states can punish people who are trying to get abortions or trying to help those getting abortions in the same ways that we've seen they have been extraordinarily creative for 30 years, and there's no reason to think they're going to stop now, right? Like, this is not, we see this as the culmination of their victory. This is step one for them. All right, next slide, please. So, as we've discussed, the effects of all of this uncertainty and all of these effects, the working class is going to suffer financially, health-wise. Assuming that you're able to obtain abortion, any delay increases the cost. It does mildly increase the risk if you get pushed into the later parts of pregnancy where it becomes more complicated. The people will continue to get abortions, right? Like, it's even in places where it's made illegal, people are always, if you need to get an abortion, you're gonna do what you can to get it. I remember listening to someone tell a story about how, it was very difficult for us to legally prove in a case I was litigating that an increase in cost would stop people from getting abortion because, there's so, talking to people, they said, oh yeah, no, this woman pawned her couch, pawned her table lamp, pawned her bed, and hitchhike, across state lines because that's what she needed to do. So people are going to continue to do that. It's going to become harder and it's going to become incredibly dangerous. I'm sorry. Anyway, the prison industrial complex will further expand, particularly against Black and brown women. The left will also be targeted. We are going to talk a little bit about the law around some of this, and in our takeaway, how important it is to talk to lawyers when you're doing some of this work. But as we expand our work in this area, we can expect to be targeted. And assisting someone to access an abortion could be, there are proposals to criminalize it. It's already can be criminal depending on your state's aiding and abetting liability, and it could be very serious charges. We're talking about what, maybe a first-degree murder charge. Next slide, please. So just to build on that, so we wanted to just give a background on some of the legal structures that are going to come into play as this new legal landscape develops. The legal restrictions on abortion range from health department regulations to criminal statutes. It varies state by state. Every state has can often have cognate agencies, but it's not going to be named the same thing everywhere, and it might be a slightly different agency that regulates. The most important ones of these, when you're thinking through what kind of work you want to take on and what kind of risk you want to, assessing risks, are the criminal laws. Criminal laws are usually enforced by county district attorneys, but attorneys general in your state can sometimes bring prosecutions even over the objections of local DAs, which is important when you're thinking about sanctuary cities or blue cities in red states. It's very complicated to figure out what will end up violating criminal laws after these bans go into effect, particularly liability for things like aiding and abetting or conspiracy. And as we've mentioned, there are states where there are already laws that are trying to introduced or enacted that are trying to make it a specific separate crime to assist someone in getting an abortion. And even if you can't be prosecuted directly for any action you're taking, every DSA chapter is either part of the national organization, which is a 501c4 registered under Washington, D.C. nonprofit law, or an independent nonprofit corporation registered in your state and regulated by your state agencies. So if even if there's not criminal liability, if you use DSA chapter resources for something that is serious enough, they may be able to come after you as for civil enforcement. All of this is to say and emphasize the legal landscape is treacherous and quickly changing. And if you're going to be doing anything that involves actions that might carry legal risk, you need to be talking to national staff, and you need to be talking to, and they hopefully, and through them, you need to be talking to criminal lawyers in your state to understand exactly what the risks are. You individually aid and abet it all away. Your DSA chapter, you just want to be sure that you're protecting the organization against serious legal consequences. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn this over to Suze to start our How Do We Take Action piece with a discussion of the existing reproductive rights advocacy space.
Thanks, Renee. So yeah, I'm really excited for this section because obviously it's the question on all of our minds of what can we do about this. And Caitlin's going to get into a broader power analysis and an assessment of what DSA's role can be in this fight moving forward. But to do that effectively, we wanted to start by contextualizing the work that we hope to do in the broader landscape. Next slide. So the first key takeaway here, we're not going to go into the specifics of every single organization or type of organization in this landscape, particularly because it does differ so much depending on where you live and the laws in your state or city or just your local area. But the most important thing to remember and situate this whole conversation in is that this work exists within a broader landscape. We are not doing this alone. This work is building on decades, including from long before Roe, of the work done by many organizations, abortion funds, clinics, reproductive justice organizations, especially those led by women of color, people of color. And so there's a very large ecosystem and network of organizations working on these topics. And we are one part of that. And so it's just good to have an understanding of what the coalition looks like and what that means for the work that we want to do now and in the future. So the most visible, familiar orgs that you have heard of, that people who are less familiar with abortion have probably heard of, are traditional reproductive rights groups like Planned Parenthood and like NARAL. A lot of those have 501c4 arms and are involved in electoral work as well, so do a wide range of advocacy, research, campaign support, things like that. And then obviously in the case of Planned Parenthood, also provide clinical and medical support. Then you have reproductive justice groups, and there's overlap between a lot of these areas we want to acknowledge, but reproductive justice groups that operate specifically through a framework of racial justice and oppression. Reproductive justice is its own whole theory of how to approach this work and what this work means and what we need to be fighting for. And organizations like Sister Song and Urge have been doing this work again for many, many decades. They oftentimes don't have a national affiliate, and some do not have an explicitly political arm and may not work on elections. By and large, these organizations have far fewer resources compared to those major reproductive rights organizations like Planned Parenthood and NARAL. Next, reproductive health organizations and clinics are the ones actually providing direct abortion and other reproductive health services. They're the ones that we talked about before in terms of Planned Parenthood affiliated clinics, as well as other independent clinics. And then lastly, abortion funds and practical support groups that provide financial and logistical assistance to abortion seekers that are, again, largely 501c3s, are largely not engaged in election work, but actually the day-to-day practical support and financial support of getting people the care that they need. Next slide. And so just some high-level best practices for coalition work that's important to be keeping in mind as you approach this work. Again, our next training is going to get much more into the specifics of what a campaign could look like in your specific city or state. And so the coalition work that you're going to be doing is going to be highly impacted by that. But do your research, know who's working on this in your state, what their framework is, what their campaign goals are, where their power comes from, who they are, how long they've been around, just situating the different groups in your specific location. The second, building relationships with care, but also not compromising on our politics of socialists. We know that working with coalition partners is absolutely necessary in this fight, especially when organizing against abortion bans or abortion funds. But we also know that building trust with coalition partners who are wary of socialists can be tricky. It's definitely doable, but being really clear of what are our values as socialists, what does that mean for what we bring to this fight, and what does that mean for the work that we do in coalitions. And so knowing that we are not just an organization at the political whim of other nonprofits, and we want to participate in coalition work that sticks to our democratically decided upon principles. The other thing to know, I don't know how long we shared results of the poll earlier, but we saw that many people are already involved with a bunch of different groups in this space. And so knowing that there are existing relationships to other organizations and volunteers, staff, people who donate, there's plenty of existing relationships. And so being really thoughtful and intentional and working with your chapter to figure out who's already engaged with some of these coalition partners can be a really good place to start. And then lastly, being clear on how to navigate compromises from the beginning, again, to the point of not compromising on our politics as socialists. What are your red lines as you approach this campaign, as you start to build out these coalitions? What are things that are not negotiable to you that you will not compromise on? And what are things that you are willing to compromise on in order to build a strong enough coalition that can win a certain fight? So again, these are high-level best practices. We'll get more into the specifics of what this looks like with different groups and wherever you may live. But just being really clear on what our values are, what we bring to the work is always going to be really helpful in making sure that we are providing the most useful and meaningful support to the coalition that we can, and that we're also bringing in partners that reflect our values. Next slide. And so one of the most important roles for DSA in this fight is bringing in other organizations into motion to defend abortion. So we just covered a lot of the organizations that are already part of these coalitions, but we want to think about building a broad mass movement to defend democracy. And that includes bringing in a lot of people who are not already engaged in this fight. So we now want to crowdsource and chat, if you want to drop in the chat, not the Q&A box, the chat directly. What are some other organizations or communities that might care about this issue? How does it impact their members? Who can we be thinking about bringing into this fight along with us? If you want to go ahead and drop any thoughts in the chat now. This could be organizations that you're involved with, that you're not involved with, religious organizations, unions. We're really curious to hear your thoughts. Awesome, getting a lot of really good feedback in the chat. Please continue to submit these, but I'm now going to pass it over to Caitlin to kind of zoom out a little bit to talk about what is power, and again, what is DSA's role in this fight to come.
Thank you. If we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so we talked about earlier about how obviously like the fight for abortion rights is the fight for power. It's a fight that is targeted at people who are oppressed genders, but it's a bigger fight than that, right? It is a fight for power and control over families, over people's lives, etc. So let's talk about power, shall we? Power is the ability to make one's vision become a reality, to make things that you want to happen, happen, essentially. Can we skip to the next slide? And we often think of power as something that is a finite resource sometimes, that when we use it, we got to save up more power to like then exercise it again. But the truth of power, right, is that using power builds power, right? This comes from Sarah Nelson, the president of the American Flight Attendants Association, one of our great union leaders in this country. People think power is a limited resource, but using power builds power. Once workers get a taste of our power, we will not settle for a bad deal, and we won't stand by while someone else gets screwed either, right? We see this all the time. Once we build power, once we win things, we're able to fight harder and fight for new things, right? So this is something that we can, I just want us to keep in our pocket. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to slow down because I know we need to slow down. Sorry, it's really hard. So all of this, you know, we've been talking for a couple of hours, or not a couple of hours. Oh my God, it just feels like that because we've said so much. If we could avoid any kind, like in the chat, just kind of stay on topic there. But so this might feel insurmountable, all the stuff we've been talking about. We all have thoughts, there's so much information to process, but actually it's not insurmountable. We'll build power if we organize, right? And that's why we're here. That's what we're here to talk about today. So next slide, please. Okay, so there are many kinds of power. Well, there aren't that many. There's a few kinds. So there's obviously like political and legislative power, and that's power that comes from, you know, that lives in like your legislatures, city councils, etc., mayors, things like that. Legal and regulatory power. There's consumer power, and then there's labor and worker power, right? So with all of these, like for political and legislative power, votes and money are what counts for them. Legal and regulatory power, it's both the laws, the regulations, but also the enforcement, right? Consumers have power in that we can cut out, we have the ability to cut off profits, and labor and worker power comes from the ability to stop production, right? And that's a big one for us. And that comes from a number of different ways, right? Like it comes from strikes, it comes from slowdowns, you know, of organized workers. It also, I mean, in some ways it comes from, there are ways that in which like demonstrations can be that same thing if we're blocking people's ability to like do things. So there's many ways that there's many places that power comes from. Next slide, please. So as socialists, and this is very specifically as socialists, this is what we, this is our theory of power. Everybody who's involved in politics has a theory of power. They have a belief that change happens some way, right? And this is ours. So in DSA, we believe that the capitalist class is the problem because they enforce this undemocratic economic system, which requires ever more exploitation all the time, right? This is not very narrowly defined. You can think about this in a larger context. There's a reason that there's so much money in politics. There's a reason that politicians are bought and sold, right? It's because they have interests in making sure that things remain a certain way, that workers are exploited as much as possible. Workers are controlled. Our ability to move is controlled. Our ability to decide where we're going to work is controlled. We believe that the working class is the agent of change because capitalism cannot function without us, right? We can't, this is one reason why we might be being forced to have children, right? It's not the only reason, but it is one. The working class, we make the profit for the capitalist class. So we believe that change happens when workers can build a movement of the majority to stop production, shut down sectors of the economy and society, and then move to actually remake our economic, social, and political systems by winning transformative demands. So basically, like, they got the money, we got the people, right? And by organizing and being able to move as in unison, we are able to actually force change. This has been seen many times over in many cases throughout history. So this is not just speculative. All right, next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes a campaign. And this is kind of generic, but it's really important to think about it right now. When we're thinking about, okay, we're buckling in, we're getting into this for the long haul. We need to think about what it means to like actually organize for the long term, what it means to organize around demands. So in a campaign, we have allies, demands, and targets, right? In training 2, we're going to focus on these again. We're going to talk about opponents and strategies and tactics. So we're going to be talking more about this context where you are. So let's move to the next slide. So we said earlier, transformative demands. What is that? A transformative demand is a demand that means that where we're winning real material change, for instance, access to abortion care with the free, on demand, and whenever you want, right? So whenever you need it. It's healthcare, right? So you should have access to it. It shifts power from the capitalist class to the working class. So access to abortion is a very serious shift in power. As we see, that's part of the fear that we have right now, is like not having power over our lives, not having power over the things that we choose to do. But importantly, transformative demands also directly confront the capitalist class and people in power, right? To show ourselves our collective power and to show the ruling class our collective power. So demands that force us to act collectively and to actually confront power with people, right, are important, because what they do is they remind us that we aren't powerless and that actually we are the most powerful people in the world, and that actually, like, as workers, we are the majority, and the people that are forcing these laws onto us are the minority. And somebody mentioned this earlier, but that's why it took them so long. That's why it took them 50 years, right? Because it's unpopular. It is it's the minority of people here who are exercising this. So it is really important that even in our smaller campaigns, right? Like we can think about the big universal campaign, right? To fight for like abortion free and on demand, right? And we can talk about all these small ones that are going to lead us there. This is the way we build our power. Exercising power builds power. All right, next slide, please. So I'm going to pass it back to, I believe, Renee, to talk about how we take action to protect abortion access right now and in the future, and how we use these principles of power to actually fight and win.
Thank you, Caitlin. So as we've alluded to in training 2, we're still working on the exact structure of it, but what we're going to do is make sure that people are in that training are working with others who are looking at trying to do similar campaigns or in similar political environments in terms of banned states versus the still legal states, and really get into the nitty-gritty of how to design campaigns. But before that, what we wanted you to do is to take a document that we're going to share with you now. If someone can go ahead and share the worksheet in the chat, so that, and this worksheet has, and can we go ahead and go through to the next, actually we'll just stay here for now. So the worksheet so there we go. So everybody should be able to access this. And what it does is it goes through first, what are the kinds of questions that any of us would need to answer when we're trying to think of what kind of campaign can we do. And here, right, like none of us are going to tomorrow plan the campaign that ends in the week-long general strike that wins back abortion rights and ends the power of the Supreme Court, right? Like that's a while off, and it's something that we need to be building toward. And so while we're building toward that, what are the kinds of campaigns we can do in the interim that bring more people into the movement, that organize them. What are the things we can do to educate and agitate the people that we're in the movement with about what the real villains are and what we are really going to need to do to win power, and how can we do all that and still be winning meaningful things along the way. So the third part of so we have the questions that in the worksheet, we have the questions that we're hoping that you will go back to your chapters and back to your communities and think about an answer and come back to training 2 with that information. We have some research tips on places to start to find some of that information. And then we have a list of potential campaign ideas that this comes from, but I really recommend taking a look at that list. It's got some really good ideas. And again, the idea is that everybody on this training and anyone who is watching this training at a later date and other people in your chapter can take this and come back to training 2, ready to put together a campaign plan, and hopefully we're going to increase collaboration between chapters in particular states. One of the things that's mentioned in the worksheet is that in training 2 is that we're going to try to be connecting people in states that already have ballot measures coming up this year to one another for Skillshare, and potentially try and get chapters around the country helping you out on that, as well as some of our national electoral resources. Next slide, please. So the next training right now is tentatively scheduled for August 2nd at 8. As I said, this has all been a little bit quickly put together. So we're still trying to figure out whether or not we're going to do just one training, or we're going to do multiple trainings, or we're going to do multiple trainings at the same time. And we also need to double confirm this time. But for right now, hold this time in your calendar. And if someone can drop the link to sign up, if you go ahead and sign up for the next training, we'll obviously let you know all the details, and particularly if it ends up moving. So if someone go ahead and drop that registration link in the chat right now. Is there someone who's able to drop that link? We'll get that in there. Can we go to the next next slide, please? Thank you. So Caitlin has just dropped the training link. So if everyone go ahead and fill that out while we're on this reminder form of powers. So again, what do we have? We have people. How can we get power? Political, legislative, legal, regulatory, consumer, and labor worker. And all of those forms of power, I hope, are addressed in some of those sample campaigns that focus on, again, things you can do that will expand access or prevent interference with access, or move us towards a better future on this, while at the same time confronting power more directly than some of the other organizing around this issue has done. So again, the first link is to the worksheet. If we could drop that again. So if you want to go ahead and copy this and bring it back to your chapter, we think that's sort of the hope. And then if you want to go ahead and register for the next training, we will get you set up. All right, so we can go ahead and go to the next slide, but due to we're having some difficulty RSVPing. We will definitely, next slide after this one, because I don't know what happened with this slide. Right, so if you're not able to RSVP, this RSVP link isn't working. So we will figure that out. We will email everybody who registered for this call with the link both to the worksheet and to the so yeah, sorry about that. We put the sign up together, very late, and so don't worry about that. It's not working. We will be okay. So don't worry about it. We will send you the link to the registration. We will send you the link to the worksheet. But what we would suggest to do right now about the sorry, trying to do 10 things at once. But right now, your next steps are look for that email, get the worksheet. We definitely have the worksheet link available. That works. So maybe we can share that again. You will definitely get an email to register for the next training, but for now you can go ahead and put it in your calendar. And if we can go back to the screen that has the date and time. The suggestion is have an organizing meeting in your chapter. If you need, if you're not sure if there's an existing socialist feminist group or another group that would make sense to work on this, reach out to your chapter leadership, get something set up, hold that meeting, have this worksheet, think about what kinds of things you want to find out, maybe not just in the worksheet, but in general, and then come back to that second training ready to go. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions because we accidentally did this under time, which is the first time in the history of a call I've been involved with this happened. So if there are questions that you still have, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I'm going to be monitoring the internal Signal chat to see what questions people are elevating, but someone had asked about, I think the Biden executive order. So the Biden executive order basically instructed all of his cabinet members to research what they could do to help abortion access. And I just want to say, if Bernie had been elected, that research would have been done in the transition planning time. And if it hadn't been done then, like, when he got elected, it would have been done when the decision leaked. The idea that you're doing an executive order to, apologies, my roommate is about to come in, so we're going to hear some noise in the background. The idea that you would do executive order telling people to research something at this point is crazy to me. The power that the executive has here is significant. He's literally the most powerful person in the world. If it were me, I'd say we're going to do emergency regulations under Title IX, requiring every university receiving federal funding to provide a full suite of health services, including abortion, to their students, and set up that confrontation with the states. So that's our official perspective on the Biden executive order. Not enough, and not really challenging the things that need to be challenged. Another question was about extradition mitigated blocks, and the real impacts on providers if they have a warrant in other states. This is, I think, a really fertile source of blue state organizing, and you will see that idea in the campaign list in the worksheet. During the Fugitive Slave Act era, blue states, free states would specifically refused to cooperate, to the point where the Wisconsin Supreme Court actually nullified the Fugitive Slave Act. The Supreme Court ordered them to unnullify it, and they just ignored the order. You can do things like that through the state legislature, or the state executive. You could say, we're not going to extradite anybody, but not only that, we're going to order every law enforcement agent in the state not to pick up the phone or cooperate anytime the red state is trying to do that. You could, there's all sorts of things. And the bills that have already been passed, there's one in California, don't go far enough. They don't provide the kind of, again, because we want that transformative demand, what we want is for the blue states to take the position that this is so far beyond the pale, they're no longer going to participate in the federal system in the same way that they do on everything else, right? We want to precipitate that crisis. All right. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions in the Signal chat. People are instead trying to figure out why the sign up link is broken, which good luck. So again, thank you so much for coming. I know this is a lot of information and we talked too fast, but there is going to be a recording. The recording will be available. So hopefully you can share it with folks in your chapter, and you can rewatch anything where we were moving too fast. The next training is August 2nd at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. we will be sharing with everybody who registered for this training I'm pretty sure we'll send out the recording, but even if we don't, we will definitely be sending out the worksheet again and the sign up sheet for the worksheet and the sign up link for the next training. In the meantime, please do, set up meetings locally in your chapters to work through some of these questions. And is there a good email that they should reach out to us? Can someone just share whatever email it is? Particularly if you're already working on or interested in working on a ballot measure in your state, please do reach out. And organizing at dsausa.org is fine. Just say protect abortion. And again, if you particularly interested, if you're already working on some of these ballot measures, because there are a couple coming up to ban and a couple coming up to not ban in the states the next month or two. And we want to make sure that we're really responsive to getting you any resources that would be helpful. So let's see. It looks like we are getting, trying to get the sign up link fixed. But in the meantime, I want to thank everyone again. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank everyone who helped put this training together. A shout out to Ali Leahy, who is in Europe right now and so couldn't present, but helped put a lot of this together. And thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. And we'll get these fuckers. Thank you.